All right, people, we're here with episode 8 of Talkin Thrones. We're this close to the end, Pat. We've almost done a full season. It's honestly kind of crazy, but it's here with episode 8 entitled The Pointy End, the third of 5 episodes directed by Daniel Minahan, written by, famously, the first episode written by the great George R.R. Martin himself. Pat, you have any words going into this episode?
Listen, I know I'm not the only one in the Talking TV audience that is wondering what the hell would have happened to that stable boy if they told Arya to attack with the other end. Right? You know? So,
well, that brings up so many bad ideas potentially of where that could have gone.
Scene.
That would have been really something else interesting. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talkin Thrones. Stay tuned. All right, Pat, episode 8. We've got 2 episodes left of season 1, our debut season of Talkin Thrones. Just first off, I just wanted to say thanks for sticking with me for this long. That's honestly impressive. Chris has built up a tolerance because he's been with me for 2 years now, but you're still kind of a recent addition by that time frame. So just thank you for that.
Oh yeah, listen, Tom, we're having fun. We're dealing with technical issues here and there, which none of the audience gets to see, but hey, we're figuring things out on the back end, and that is something that I am glad to mess around with. Yes. So for the most part, let's jump right in, because my biggest question of this episode, Tom, is, everything's going down there.
Yes.
The Lannisters are killing off the Stark guards and people.
It is pandemonium. This episode is like the fallout from Ned's utter and stupid mistake.
And so Arya is looking through all the luggage that's knocked over. It's like, where's Needle? Where is it? I need it. And the stable boy comes up from behind, and it's like, I'm going to turn you in. And she basically turns around and stabs him and then says, stand back. It's like, damn.
It doesn't even give him a chance. Doesn't even give him a second's hesitation.
Pointy End first, ask questions later. So I guess that's where the episode gets its name.
Well, yeah. And obviously refers back to the statement that Jon gave her in the second episode when he left, when she said, what do you do with it? And she said, stick him with the pointy end. And obviously, she's taken that completely to heart. It just shows that maybe there was something wrong with this girl, from the start, possibly, as far as the path that she would go down.
Well, I think, the beauty of this season is the fact that, you had Robert, and he's talking with his men about, what is your first kill, how significant it was, and all this stuff. And this is sort of world building. But then, a few episodes later, here's Arya, and this is her first kill. And you could just see it in her eyes.
It's kind of miserable. It's not like this satisfying, glorifying thing. It's kind of a heart-wrenching experience that kind of cripples you and scars you for life.
Yeah, but she doesn't have time to process it because she's got to run away. So it's basically
a survival tactic.
Yeah, it's traumatizing, but she doesn't have time to let it do that. So over the next episode, specifically in the final episode of season 1, we're gonna really see some trauma in Arya's character starting to develop.
Indeed, especially with what she comes to witness. But yes, let's dive in. As I mentioned before, again, this is episode 8 of season 1, entitled The Pointy End. This is the third of 5 episodes directed by Daniel Minahan, and the first of 4 episodes that George R.R. Martin himself wrote for the show. If you'll remember back to our premiere episode when we talked about how the debut, when Martin, Benioff, and Weiss negotiated the deal, it was that Martin would write 1 episode per season, and this was his first one. And when we open up, this episode is to kind of sum it up, is a transition episode while at the same time being an interesting fallout. I kind of like these types of episodes in television when they can kind of use the fallout event to lead into the continuing story to push for the finale. It's always kind of really interesting, and Game of Thrones was really good at that at one point.
Yeah, well, this starts off hey, all these murders and death. And,
If you're a Stark in King's Landing, you don't have a chance. They kill everyone. They kill Sansa Septa. They kill the regular horse people. They kill, they try to kill Syrio, but obviously that death happens off screen. If you're related to a Stark, you are dead.
The first Sword of Bravos is probably one of the best characters in the show, and
yes,
they kill him off camera, so there is hope that he actually succeeded in that sword fight.
Our death count is gonna have a field day this episode.
Yeah, so maybe the first Sword of Bravos gets his own spin-off show, like showing what he did for the other 7 seasons. Yeah. Unless they did confirm. I don't know if, because there is in the next episode or two, there is like some heads on pikes and whatnot. I don't know if you saw the
I don't believe we saw his.
Oh, so there's still hope.
Yeah, there is still hope. I don't even remember if in the books his head was there. But then again, because he was trying to torture Sansa, not Arya, because that was Joffrey doing that.
Yeah, at that particular point. But for the most part, it's like this side character that is really well played, and it also is just a great character. With a wooden sword, he's able to take out all these guards.
Three guards.
Yeah, and it's like even with his wooden sword cracked in half when the main leader of that guard troop is taking him on, there's a little bit of chance, there's hope that he'll actually rue the day because he's just that good of a sword fighter.
Yeah, indeed. There is a lot that happens in this episode. I think we just need to get into it, really, because there's like 4 different storylines going on here.
I'm done. My favorite part was that sword fighting in the beginning of the episode. I don't know what strikes you, man. What came up?
Yeah,
next?
so obviously we have Varys visiting Ned in the dungeons. After Arya famously kills the table boy. That's a really good scene. It's a really well shot scene. I think it adds a lot of context. It kind of continues to confuse Ned as far as where certain characters' loyalties lie, and he's still trying to figure out, like, kind of even now, even with his kind of imprisonment and eventual kind of move towards a certain fate, he is still trying to figure out what's going on. He still has no idea, and Varys comes to him and tries to offer him some solace in his pain, even though he can't really offer him any sort of freedom, right?
Yeah,
and it's kind of
the stuff with Varys, like specifically. Who is he serving in that scene? Like Cersei, basically.
In that scene himself. Himself.
No. He says, like, Ned asks him, like, who are you serving? He says the realm because someone has to. And that's a truthful statement, I think, from his character. But at the same time, the whole point of these vignettes with Varys and Ned Stark, in this episode and I believe in the next episode, basically it's convincing him to confess and do what Cersei wants, and therefore he can be kept alive. And basically, is he really doing this? He's protecting the realm, but what he thinks is best for the realm is serving Cersei in this particular moment.
Right, exactly. No, exactly. And in this case, and the thing about Varys is that Varys has always been kind of a mysterious and elusive character, right? But I feel like also he's one of those guys that we haven't gotten like that much characterization for yet. But obviously the thing of interest comes in, of course, when later on, both in the books and the show, it is revealed that he's secretly working for the Targaryens, as is revealed with the conversation with Illyrio that Arya overheard in previous episodes before. So as far as other storylines in this episode go, I just wanted to kind of cut to some other vignettes that happened majorly before we get to the main storyline, obviously, which is the direct fallout and the reaction of Winterfell to the events in King's Landing. So we have up at the wall, obviously, we have the fallout after Jon and Sam take their vows, and Ghost brings back a direwolf, an undead hand. They end up bringing 2 corpses inside the wall.
Yeah. The bodies, yeah.
Yeah, the bodies.
And Sam, proving that how smart he is, he's just like, yo, where's that smell from the rot? Mm-hmm. And it's like these bodies are not smelling. And I think, that's one of those things where Sam comes in as a coward. Jon has to protect him, and it causes all this great tension. But now we're starting to see that Sam is actually well read, and he's going to bring all the book smarts to the characters in the wall. Probably going forward in most of the plot lines, if I remember correctly.
Yes, indeed. He kind of becomes like the wisdom soothsayer, like kind of almost like the beginning of the old bard character, basically, like the keeper of knowledge.
It's weird to me, like, his father sends him to the wall because, I don't want you inheriting all my lands and whatnot. wouldn't it have made more sense to just send him to be a maester? Like, he
Yeah.
probably wouldn't take over your
It wouldn't
lands
have-
either.
Yeah,
But
it would have kind of been the best for all worlds.
yeah, like at least he could have brought some like respect and honor to your name if that was your concern. Wouldn't it be better to have someone that's a maester in the family than someone that basically
That could potentially inherit your
part of the
lands.
Night's
That's
Watch?
right. That's disappointing. Right, exactly. Because especially with like kind of the relative instability of the Night's Watch as the series goes on. So obviously they bring the bodies inside. Jon is in prison after Sir Alliser tries to comment on him being the son of a traitor after the news reaches the wall of Ned's imprisonment and supposed betrayal.
Well, it's the whole idea is like, again, it's Jon took this oath, but he's still like so youthful and hasn't really gotten the oath wrapped around his head.
Right.
You are dedicated for life to this oath.
Right. He's still feeling some familial bonds there.
Yeah, so he's ready to rush off, and it's like, no, dude, like, you better stay here. You better not do anything stupid. And, for the most part, I guess it's a good thing he was locked in his quarters because he hears some stuff going on, and, his ghost basically sort of leads him to Mormount's chamber, and inside is... I don't know what we call him. What do we call him? Like zombie,
so this is officially
White Walker. What?
So we're gonna get into our This is gonna be our transition into the GOT-chaverse segment a little bit early because this is the subject of today's episode. We finally see up close and personal the thing that was hinted at in the opening sequence of the whole show, all the way back in that first episode. Winter is coming. We see the undead, zombified corpses of people resurrected by the White Walkers, up close and personal. Undead men that are frozen with blue eyes, known as whites, basically. They are completely invulnerable. They can basically attack anyone at will. As is later revealed, the only things that we are able to be used to stop them are dragon glass and fire. But the way, of course, that the ancient legend goes with the White Walkers is that the White Walkers rose the ones that they specifically killed. Almost like a combination of... It's interesting because it dives into the history of zombies predating kind of sci-fi territory, back when they were like kind of the source of like voodoo, basically. Like there would be a lot of voodoo, a lot of bad black and white voodoo movies that would use like zombies as the antagonist, basically. And that seems to be primarily a little bit of inspiration for them. But the other inspiration obviously seems to come from...
You think the inspiration could have been Stargate Atlantis? Because the bad guys in there are the Rife or Rafe. And, they kind of look like the White Walkers, to be honest. But, obviously George R. Martin probably wasn't watching Stargate. Or maybe he was.
Maybe he was, honestly. He was a sci-fi writer, so around that time. It would make sense, actually, if he was.
When did he write these books?
He wrote these books in the starting in the early 90s.
Ah, man. I think Stargate is early 2000s, so,
so it could have been just around that time period. It could have been.
Yeah, listen, I'm a sci-fi fan, so maybe I'm being a little too hopeful here.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm surprised you haven't known about more of his stuff. Yeah, because basically this all stems from the fact that Cersei had Sansa write a letter that she sends out to all corners of the realm, basically, in order to get everyone together. So Catelyn gets the letter in the Eyrie, approaches Lysa, gets angry at her for keeping it from her. Lysa says that she's staying in the Eyrie and not going anywhere, and Catelyn kind of comes to this understanding that her sister is kind of not to be relied on anymore.
Yeah,
so
her sister is basically crazy.
Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
They have 100% in all the episodes this season made that abundantly clear. It's so campy, the whole 8-year-old still getting breastfed, and in this scene it's hard to watch, just him sort of like playing at the strings of her dress and complaining that he's hungry, and it's like, oh my god, there is something wrong with this child. And Lysa always talks about like, oh, the knights will stay here to protect our lord, and she's talking about her son, but it's like, that's a little bit of overprotection, and he's not going to be, as we find out later in the series, capable of doing anything.
No, not at all. In fact, he's so useless that he literally ages like the course of 3 years for the finale, to the point where we don't even recognize him, and it somehow allows him to live. So I guess in that case, kudos for him being like one of the only surviving characters on the show. But yes.
I guess I didn't recognize.
No one did. No one did. It was the two big things of 2019. The kids that no one recognized that they forgot grew up. Him in the Game of Thrones finale, and the kid from Iron Man 3 at Tony Stark's funeral in Avengers Endgame.
Wait. So literally, he's in the final sequence.
Yes, he's at Tyrion's trial when Tyrion, the prisoner, makes Bran king.
Yeah, when Tyrion the prisoner decides the fate of all the world, it's the biggest. Anyway, don't get me started on that again.
Yeah. So basically, Cat leaves the Eyrie, but we come to the folk. Tyrion also, as well, is walking through the Eyrie with Bronn. Promises to pay Bronn.
The Hill Tribesmen.
Yeah, the scenes with the Hill Tribes. We finally get into these guys. These guys are around for too short of a time. They're only around for 2 seasons, but they are ultimately fantastic. Basically, Tyrion and Bronn are attacked by the local tribesmen of the Eyrie, known as the Hill Tribesmen. But of course, Tyrion manages to gain their allegiance with his silver tongue. And this is just
kill
this
Bronn
whole sequence,
and basically let the little man dance. And he's no, keep us both.
This whole sequence is just comedy gold. Just I wonder if I gotta wonder what episode Peter Dinklage submitted for his Emmy that he won for. But I have to assume that it was this one because he is just on all levels of incredible in this.
Yeah. It's one of those things where this is where we start seeing Tyrion, play the, logistics strategy game. And, he's able to convince the trial by combat. He's able to get out of there. Now he's basically convincing these hill tribes to take him back to, Tywin's camp, battle camp.
Yes.
And we start to see him really, start to manipulate people, and really to his benefit, to a really high degree. And I think, as we'll see in the next couple episodes, this is how he convinces his father that he's actually a smart mind worth being utilized by the Lannister family.
Yeah, this is Tyrion's moment to shine, ultimately, because he manages to convince all of these people, seemingly out of the blue, to follow him and pledge them to his father for service, and also kind of starts to at least let his father know that he is a presence to be reckoned with, ultimately. So, in order to kind of wrap that up, basically, Jon also ends up, what's it called? Oh, wait. Hold on. I got it. Sorry. I got confused with my storylines there for a second. So Jon ultimately discovered that he could burn the whites alive in Essos, obviously.
Oh, yeah, we're going back to that.
It's
the worst shot ever. He Mormont's holding the lamp like this, and Jon just palms it like he's LeBron James. And it's like, what?
And it takes 3 seconds for him to burn his head. He grabs it, chucks it, and it's dude, come on.
He can't just grab the handle and rip it out of Mormont's hand.
In the books, he accidentally lights himself on fire and loses use of that hand for weeks.
Oh god, maybe that would have been a better storyline, but it was very awkward in terms of the staging.
Yeah,
which that's fine. It's forgivable. We can maybe I'm just since this is the second time I've watched this in 2 weeks, maybe it's just me nitpicking. But he throws it, he burns the zombie, and that's the end of that. They actually know how to kill those zombies, and that
yes,
exist.
indeed, it's a thing that is established in this season, which I think is really cool. That's a through line that continues through to the end, even if so many different through lines that were just abandoned ultimately at the end. But hey, that's the thing. I'm still coming up with something special that we're gonna do for the final 6 episodes. It's just gonna be something big where we just have to roast them at each point in each of the final 6. But we have one quick scene with Daenerys and Essos. Ultimately, it's ultimately again a demonstration show and also a transition into where kind of her arc will wrap up tragically at the end of this season. This scene is rough. This scene is rough, but it's awesome. It's at the same time.
So how Daenerys ends this season to me hasn't sit right with me, and it's just. This is the beginning of the end, and it's obviously her character comes back strong in the second season, but for the most part, it's they're in a village, it's being conquered. I think this is the moment where Drogo is I'm going to get you that throne.
Yes,
it's he decides that that's something he's going to do for her.
Yeah, they're conquering villages along the way, though. Basically,
yeah, exactly. And
they're looting and pillaging, doing Dothraki things.
Yeah, so they basically get up to this is it a witch village or it's just a
no, I think it's just a regular village that just happens to have the witch in it. That's a local Maishin.
Got you. So there's so much weird with it because Daenerys is like, oh no, don't assault those women. But it's like, as we learn later in this plot line, it's all those women have been like attacked numerous times by the time Daenerys, even notices them.
Yes.
And it's like no one sort of consults her like, hey, like, we've actually already brutalized these women. You might not want to trust them when they say they can heal your husband. Like how does this, it doesn't make any sense to me. Mormont is there. He's a knight, and, he has to have some sort of medical knowledge, and he can't treat Drogo's wound. Like, it just doesn't make sense that the woman that you just victimized, you're going to trust to heal Drogo after that incident with one of his men.
Yeah.
That leads him to have a cut on his chest.
Yeah.
It just seems like
that's a big thing that ultimately. So I remember how I said at the beginning that season 1 was almost beat for beat what happened. That is not how Drogo got the wound in the books. That was a thing that the show changed, and it was very, very over dramatically done. Basically, he basically gets a wound in the fight while they're conquering villages. Basically, that's what happens, and then. When it's basically like when he gets back to the village, it's kind of like they don't really have time to find a doctor, and Miri Mazdur happens to be there because Daenerys has already demanded her be given to her, and then she goes to treat Drogo. And this, it's like, just one of Drogo's blood riders just wanted to get in a fight, and they just needed an excuse to kind of show off Jason Momoa fighting because they didn't have the budget to do an actual fight like that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they could have planted the seeds for this sequence a lot earlier in the season. Like maybe they capture the village and, Daenerys protected her and she becomes a little bit of a side character for like an episode or two. And, then it's like, okay, we as the audience sort of, since she's been with us for an episode or two, can trust her as well. It's one of those things when I'm watching, it's like, no, Danny, don't do it. Don't trust some stranger.
Yeah.
There, it's
like, have you never heard of the term stranger danger before?
Yeah. I don't know if I would go that far, but, for the most part, I just felt totally like this is going to end bad for Drogo and ultimately Dany, because who is this woman? You haven't vetted her. It's clearly she has a gripe, with the fact that you destroyed her village. It's not going to go well to allow her to sort of be your medical staff.
Yeah.
It just, so I think
it's a dumb move. It's an amateurish move, and it's ultimately the beginning of the end for Dany, at the beginning of one of many painful lessons that she'll learn along the way.
Dany basically, from my point of view, up until the final scene of this season, everything between now and that moment that we get at the end of the season before the credits hit, basically is terrible.
Dany.
There's only one redeeming factor for her for the rest of the season.
Yeah, even if the fight itself was cool, the fight itself between Drogo and his blood rider was cool.
Yeah, Jason Momoa. This is the last we'll see of him, doing a good job for Game of Thrones, because
for another 8 years until Aquaman.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far. I'm just saying for Game of Thrones. But like the main
just
thing
Jason Momoa's career ultimately, even though it's supposed to kind of take off after Game of Thrones, kind of lapses. He's in a bad Sylvester Stallone movie, and he's in a lot of bad movies up until he finally breaks out in Aquaman in the DC movies. Those have ultimately been the best thing for him, which is kind of crazy to say, especially given how good he is in this show.
Yeah, I think he grew in popularity. He started doing movies because, for the most part, I believe he was mainly a television actor before this.
Yeah, he was.
And this was sort of like a big role that allowed him to transition into movies.
Yes.
And, I don't like, his final performance, in the final episode.
Well, he doesn't really have that much to do with the final episode. So
yeah, we'll get to that when we get to it.
Yeah,
but,
let's get to the main focus.
Let's just say he's in his prime during this fight scene for his ability in the show.
So we got Tyrion, we got Jon, we got Dany. So let's move on to the focus, ultimately, of this episode. Our focus character tonight, ultimately, Robb Stark. Ned has been arrested. It is officially, the call has been sounded by Sansa, by Cersei through way of Sansa to Robb to come to the capital and surrender, ultimatty. The capital.
It's funny you mentioned
slip of the tongue there.
Well, I basically,
because King's Landing is famously known for its smell caused by its terrible plumbing system.
And I'm a little bit ahead. I started watching the season 2, and there is a reference to how bad it smells. So,
Yeah.
when you say that, it's kind of fits the show. But anyway, go ahead. Basically, we're talking about Robb.
Yes. So Robb ultimately gets the letter telling him to come to King's Landing to surrender, and Robb says, "Oh, if I'm going south, I gotta get the boys together." And he ultimately tells Maester Luwin, "Let's see what the Northmen's loyalty to our father means," and he summons them to battle ultimately in order to go south and begin the conflict to free Ned ultimately. It's crazy to me still how this kind of starts off as like a tiny little micro rebellion basically that breaks out into like a full-scale war with like just betrayal on all sides. It speaks to the power of Game of Thrones storytelling ultimately.
I think the whole idea that okay, so Robb is bringing his bannermen. They're ready to go to war, for Ned. And, at this point, it's really just a misunderstanding. And through the scene with Varys in this episode and the next episode, it's kind of like, the Lannisters know they got to smooth it over. So it's interesting to see the mechanism of war start to take place here. And I think, once the Bannermen come in and they're at that dinner and, who is Robb? Ultimately, that's what the Bannermen are asking. Why should we follow Robb? And Dom, what are your thoughts on?
No, he gives them, I think that
how Robb handles himself.
I think ultimately this is Robb's coming into his own. This is Robb realizing that he's no longer a boy. He has to be a man. I think the scene where Cat arrives and he, for 1 second, gives away like he's the boy again, and then he has to put on the cold exterior and become the man, and he can't even embrace her until everyone else is out of the tent because he realizes he is now the head of the family. He has to show strength, kind of. He, in a weird way, is the Michael Corleone, albeit kind of without the him being a murderer on that front. He he just becomes like kind of a soldier and later on a king in his own right. Ultimately, it's a lot of Robb's arc is ultimately tragic because it begins with such promise. Ultimately, although it is, of course, him being thrust into an impossible and futile situation, and one that ultimately he does not walk away from. But the interesting thing about Robb is that he did and did not act like Ned. He was always the man of action. He was always trying to stay one step of his enemies. He won every battle, famously, as is said. But ultimately, he didn't see the writing on the wall. He didn't see which advisors were turning against him until it was too late. And unlike Ned, which Ned's feels so much more obvious because it feels like Ned had warning signs the entire time, the thing that makes Robb's death at the end so tragic is the fact that he ultimately didn't see it coming because he never had a chance. Ultimately, because Roose Bolton was so cunning that way.
Yeah, but he, basically, I would say that Robb, his downfall happened to be the fact that he wouldn't honor the whole marriage agreement. That he falls in love, in season 2. I think right, season 2.
Season 2.
Yeah, so basically, because he's unwilling to honor his thing, that leads to the sort of treachery that ends up befalling Robb. But yes. I think one of the things that is very interesting is, in season 1, there's characters like, Theon is not so great, Robb's not so great. Arya's pretty much, I think, a favorite for a lot of people. I think Tyrion, obviously he's not a Stark, but like Tyrion's a favorite. Like Robb is a character that I don't think is really anyone's favorite.
Yeah.
Until this moment when he starts bringing the North to war. Right. And, basically in the next 2 episodes, he gets a couple victories under his belt. The fact that he proves that he's somewhat of a good warlord is something that makes, elevates him probably to one of the best characters this show has, and I would say that probably lasts throughout the whole second season.
Yeah, I agree with that ultimately. Robb, I think one of my favorite scenes also, there's a couple of great scenes with Robb obviously having to prove himself. The scene with the great John Umber, obviously the leader of the Umber forces, one of the many northern houses. Some of the others obviously that we hear of, throughout the series, Glover, Hornwood.
You're talking about the one that happens this episode, right? With Umber?
Yes. Yeah, basically he complains just about his placement in the line, and then he threatens to desert. And then Robb's direwolf, Grey Wind, comes up and attacks him and bites off his fingers. And Robb gives him a cold And Robb gives him a cold proclamation, obviously, a cruel joke in order to give him to cover it up, that he only meant to cut his meat by pulling a blade on him. And then later on, when they catch the spy, obviously when they're planning their first attack, but Robb decides to let him go, basically giving him a word saying that all of his men that are coming for Tywin Lannister's forces. It seems like an amateurish move, but later on it is revealed to actually have been a genius ploy, showing that Robb, despite being young, does have a mind and a surprisingly good knacking strategy for battle. It really is interesting because I think that had he survived, I think Robb actually would have been a really good ruler.
Yeah, I think, they set him up. Like, that's the thing about this whole entire series is that there's moments that this could end at any time. Like, it basically is a spiral downwards into the depths. And, basically we'll talk about it, next episode 9. But basically Joffrey's decision, to not honor sort of the behind closed doors deal between Cersei and Ned basically is what makes this war between Robb and the Lannisters happen. And, we also talk about Lysa, where she says the Knights of the Vale will not leave. If they had left and, basically joined forces with Robb, that would have really put the pressure on the Lannisters to back down even more. So there's a lot of like specific, things that happen that basically let this spiral out of control and get to the point where the realm is unstable. And, I think, Ned, before he gets captured in the last episode, he writes that letter directly to Stannis, basically telling him about the bastard children.
Yep.
And
literally in the nick of time as well.
Yeah. And that's going to have like a really big impact in the, start of the second season.
Yes.
And for the most part, I will say that, all this messages, with the ravens and sending them out, all the Seven Kingdoms, like these people are gossip hounds. They basically just want their business out in the open.
It's surprising, honestly, because even though Westeros has no social media, it is fascinating kind of how fast they receive news. I'm like, damn, like that Raven service is just really that good, isn't it?
Yeah, but like they're, Ned is obviously someone that's very conservative, and he's. Hold on a second. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, someone just asking me a question. So
it'll be that'll be a good cut. That'll be a good one to keep in here.
No. It's someone asked me about the air conditioning, so it is a little hot in here. I'm sweating if you can't tell, but Anyway, so it's for the most part we're basically. This Raven service lets everyone know, and
it's insane. Honestly,
they're not bashful about what they say, except for Ned. Ned basically only told Stannis about the bastards, and but that news eventually is going to get out to everybody, and
yes,
it's very interesting. Once that happens, then really it kind of explains a lot that happens season 2, 3, 4, and so on.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Ultimately, ultimately, it ends kind of with this insane kind of closing scene. Ultimately, that is so proclamative, if you will, with kind of Joffrey kind of beginning his reign as king and beginning to make his decisions. I love it too because this episode is kind of the low-key beginning of kind of a lot of proclamations for this one place in the Riverlands known as Harrenhal, which becomes like a big set piece in season 2 ultimately. But if you kind of think about it, it's kind of a useless ruin basically. But it keeps being granted to all of these lords like it's some kind of it's some kind of reward basically. It's granted to 3 different people over the course of, I think, 2 seasons before it's kind of largely forgotten about. And the first one, obviously, that is granted to is Janos Slynt by Joffrey, famously for his betrayal of Ned. I also like here how basically, like, literally 2 episodes ago, it was Ned sending out soldiers to arrest Gregor Clegane, and now Joffrey's on the throne. Like, it feels like a lot has gone on in, like, a matter of a week.
Question: was this the episode where basically the head of the King's Watch was told to go packing?
No, that. Oh, yes, that actually does happen.
I remember that scene. So
yeah, basically next he names Tywin Hand of the King, and then basically it ends. They're basically like, yeah, Sir Barristan, you're out.
Yeah, that sucks because he was basically one of these honorable men, and he got dirty just like Ned did.
Yes,
and he basically starts stripping his guard and saying, "I'm going to die a knight." And Littlefinger basically goes, "Yeah, a naked knight." Apparently,
it still leads to one of my favorite moments, basically, and it's ultimately good to see Barristan walk out of here like a boss. He ultimately is absent for a season before he pops up serving Daenerys, and he proves that he is completely like a master of what he does when he pulls his sword, and quits in the absolute bossest way by saying like, "Here, boy," after throwing his sword down. Melt it down and add it to the collection, basically kind of stating symbolically that it's nothing more than a symbol of power, and and the people who serve it ultimately receive no glory in the end, kind of. Yeah. And it ultimately it proves to be a very futile and stupid decision as he ends up going to serve Daenerys later on.
Yeah, but I think this is a nice little sort of peppering in foreshadowing of like what he's going to do, because Barristan is sort of an honorable man,
yes,
just like Ned is. And they're getting rid of him. And so I think the fact that they're doing him dirty in this episode should really clue everybody into how Ned's going to be done dirty in the next episode.
Yes, indeed. It is, like I said, it is the beginning and the setting up of a lot of scenes that will eventually play out in very ugly fashion in the last 2 episodes, as we have the final sequence being Sansa coming up. And while there still seems to be some good grace left, she pleads to Joffrey for her life, for her father's life. Ultimately, I love the excuses that she comes up with, because she really does put her all into it. She really does believe this stuff that she's saying, because she really has no idea, and like she's so naive and so innocent here that it almost makes me believe it. Where she's like, "Oh, what's it called? His leg was really hurting him. That he was being manipulated by Robert's brothers who wanted the throne. That he loved Robert."
Sansa is such a weird character at this point
in this season.
No, she's very one-dimensional. I think.
Yes.
I think she really.
But
does
here's the
play
thing:
it well.
Yes,
but
she plays it very well.
It's one of those things where I don't know if they really had enough plot-wise for her. She's sort of like the damsel in distress that gets, sort of usurped by Cersei and Joffrey, and that's it. She's someone that has to be rescued, and really that's the only character arc she has this season is like innocent girl who's captured for ransom.
Yep, pretty much.
That's about it.
Yep.
But obviously Sansa becomes, a much more in-depth character.
Yes.
Things still tragically happen to her, but ultimately it's a series-long arc for her to really be defined, what type of woman she becomes.
Ultimately, her naivete here is for a purpose, which is why I still get behind it. It definitely feels like it's building up to something like a lot more tragic, where she doesn't get the happy ending that she's so dreaming of, and her naivete is kind of thrust aside and broken down in favor of like kind of rough experience that she experiences at the hands of all of the men in her life, with the only good one seemingly being Tyrion. But the episode ends with Joffrey granting her plea of mercy, but only if Ned proclaims him as the true king, and in that way he will be sent off to the wall in order to live out the rest of his days. And it kind of ends on that cliffhanger right there with the cut to black. So ultimately, Pat, I wonder what happened. What do you think happened in the interlude that caused Joffrey to go back on his word? Was it like the show of? Was it like the power of the crowd? The show of like the need to show strength? Ultimately, was it just like power hungry? Was there something that just snapped at that moment? Like, what was it?
I think for the most part, what we're going to see next episode is the fact that he wants to be a ruthless king, and he does not want to project to his people that he is someone that gives mercy, and so I think that's what he's thinking in that moment. And he's just like, nope, there's no mercy here. You do me dirty, you're going to end up dead. So I think that's his decision, and he doesn't listen, to Cersei. He doesn't listen to all the other people and what they're telling him. And really, I think, what we're going to find is that Joffrey just really doesn't have the political intelligence to really know what he needs to do. He basically is just sort of this ruthless young stupid child. And,
Yes.
he's not going to have enough time to really smarten up.
Yes, ultimately, Joffrey is, again, a tragic character, if not a cruel one, because he's kind of thrust into this position, again, very, very early, and kind of gives in to his deeper urges, and ultimately becomes more and more insane as time goes on, but ultimately more and more just kind of unfavorable, because he, in a weird way, becomes like the AJ Soprano of the show, in that he's just constantly this figurehead when the real work is being done, obviously, by his grandfather and his mother and his small council, basically. And that's kind of, and that's kind of the reign that we sit through for the next kind of 3 seasons of the show before things finally shake up, obviously, with his death, ultimately. So I think this was a good episode, ultimately. It's, strangely enough, though, it's not one of my favorites. I think that, ultimately, it feels like there's too much that happens here rather than, like, me getting some of the rich character moments from the show. I think I have this ranked at, like, my third least of the my third least of the show. I have it above the pilot in the 4th episode.
Yeah,
but
like what I'm going to say is that with this episode, there's a lot of basically setup for basically the next episode and the final episode, but also for the series going forward. And this time, it doesn't seem as like hard to swallow as like the first couple episodes of the season. Like you really, looking at your watch, looking at your phone, like the first couple episodes are really like, come on, let's speed this up.
Yeah, and then by the time we get to like the last couple episodes, it's like boom, boom, boom. Now we're moving.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happens in this episode is interesting and intriguing, and I think starting us off with the first sword of Bravos, the best character of the show. Let's face it.
Yeah.
In such a cool action sequence, giving us Drogo in another action sequence. I think they give us enough of the action this episode to really make all the other sort of information type scenes, very well, fit. So anyway, I'm ready for it. The GOT-chaverse, you want to talk about the White Walkers. I want to know more about them. What the hell are they doing? Where are they right now at this moment, in the show? What's going on?
Yeah, the White Walkers are still pretty much a mystery at this point, right? We obviously learned their origin later on, that they were created by the Children of the Forest as kind of a weapon to use against the First Men when they first entered Westeros, and later on, obviously, they kind of rebelled. But it's weird because the legends about the Long Night say that it lasted for like I think it was like 10 years. I think was when it lasted before the World of Men were finally able to fight back against it. Basically, it was the idea that the White Walkers were led by this one figurehead called the Night King. And as we see in season 4, with the way that they created, they would apparently kidnap human children at night and transform them, because apparently they had to be transformed young in order to grow up to become a White Walker, essentially. And then they would raise their armies of the dead and wage wars against mankind, basically. But then apparently they went to sleep and hibernated, because they were thrown back by men at first, obviously, with the construction of the wall by Brandon the Builder. But now they've reawoken, and now they've returned. And ultimately, we kind of see their overall conquest of Westeros play out, ultimately, as to how they are summed up as being the overall looming threat. But in a weird way, I think it's one of those situations that kind of works out better in the books, because because they're so used so minimally within the books. It kind of allows them to become more overwhelming. Like, the interesting thing is that the hard home attack that is so prescient in season 5 of the show is not seen in the books. It's only heard about. It's some letters that are written back, basically, and it makes it sound like it was a massacre that they basically walked into. That it was already like so bad that like they were even overwhelming the ships. Like, that's how bad it got. Like, they barely got out with any of the wildlings. But it's written in letter form, so it does the Jaws thing of like kind of building up the anticipation more in your head. And so that's kind of where I think they ultimately go wrong with the White Walkers. I think they kind of become a little bit too hungry with like the cool filming they can unleash with how terrifying these things are, basically. So I think that we kind of got a little bit spoiled a little bit early there, because even though the moment is awesome, it still ultimately kind of peaks them too hard, And so it kind of makes us much more nitpicky when it comes to things like the Long Night, or when they attack the Weir Tree, or the battle that they have with Jon's folks when they go north of the wall in season 7. So ultimately, I think that while the concept of them is cool, I still think that the White Walkers unfortunately kind of fall into the kind of just needing an antagonist for antagonist's sake, and that they're kind of just like this unwielding, unmoving force. They don't really have any personality. They're kind of just blocks, quite literally blocks of ice that move forward for our heroes to overcome.
Yeah, I think, for the most part, the show does a really good job of making the White Walkers seem like a legitimate threat. Even up into, episode, I forgot which number, but in season 5, the Hard Home
Yeah,
battle
episode 8.
sequence. Yeah, so when John is sort of surviving and he's on the raft and he's floating away from the army of the dead, and the Night King is sort of lifting up his arms and raising the now dead
It's an
wildlings
awesome
and
moment.
such. It's an awesome moment, but it's also it gives a little bit of characterization to the Night King that he knows what he's doing and he knows that he's a threat to humanity. But I feel like from that moment going forward to the end of the series, there's really the audience is not clued into anything other than he's just a zombie ready to steamroll the Westeros. And it would have been nice to have a little more sort of intelligence behind the bad guy, like introduce us to sort of what specific plot that the White Walkers have in mind for humans. It's almost like they become a silent bad guy and they're just sort of like a juggernaut coming towards them.
Yes.
And I think that's really, if you were going to talk about like a mistake of them just being a bad guy for bad guy's sake, I agree with that. But I think they could have very easily, allowed, just had some scenes where the White Walkers are doing a little more strategy and really beating the humans back in sort of a way that shows that they have true intelligence and make them a little scary in that way. So we'll
part
find
of
out
the
because like I don't
yeah.
I those later seasons, even though they're more recent, I still would love to get a second chance to check them out and see how I feel.
Yeah, part of the interest ultimately that comes from kind of the continued pushback publication date of the Winds of Winter is the fact that Martin has stated heavily that he will get into a lot more of the magical subplot and how that factors into the story within the third season that kind of wasn't as prevalent. The interesting thing about magic as far as how it's used is that it kind of goes away the minute that the White Walkers die, the minute that the White Walkers are stopped. And then it kind of just reverts back to just normalcy, kind of. And that's kind of what really kind of makes it even more underwhelming is because, like, Martin has been hinting that, like, there's this one other secret weapon that they potentially could use besides just, like, dragonglass and fire. And there's, and at the hinting of Euron Greyjoy coming into the show, like, Euron Greyjoy has, I can already tell, has a very different trajectory in the books than in the show. So, like, that's also part of the intrigue there. And so the fact that kind of the show is almost, like, dived away from that, I feel like, that could also offer up some perspective there as well. So, and wrapping up, we got a few comments, obviously, that we want to hit. Eric's, thank you so much for once again being the only person to actively contribute to our chat. Yes, indeed, this is where Arya kills for the first time, if you remember correctly. Syrio is the guy. Could he have survived? His death was off screen. Unfortunately, only because Game of Thrones has broken that if they die off screen, they could still be alive rule 3 times. First with Syrio, the second time with Stannis, and the third time with the Bryn of the Blackfish Tully in season 6. I think George is a Marvel Comics fan. LOL. Robb and Aaron. Yes, that's also a thing that I'm glad that he brings up because Robb and Aaron famously is one of a couple of people whose names were changed for the show. His name in the books is Robert Aaron. He is named after Robert Baratheon. And in the show, it is changed to Robin in order to apparently not confuse him with Robert Baratheon. I don't know why. Eric is still...
I think, changing names so they're not matching and just making them a little more individual. That seems to be a common translation thing from like, books into television or movies.
Yeah, it seems to happen quite frequently, I've seen. He also says, to be fair about Tyrion being as a prisoner, he was a prisoner of the people on the council. Okay, yeah, but he's still a prisoner. What's it called? Whoa, Hard Home is one of the best episodes. And Euron is probably the worst character in the show. Yeah, he is not a good character ultimately in the show. Kind of, I think there's a reason why kind of the books kept him a lot more of a mysterious character. Like he's very much in the shadows. There's a reason why when we go back to the Greyjoy Island, we're introduced to his two surviving brothers, Aeron and Victarion, and it's Victarion who we actually follow west to as the Greyjoy to try and go and team up with Daenerys ultimately. So before we go, of course, Pat, we have our little death count ticker to keep track of. And I actually think I did pretty good with the death counter. I counted no less than, well, aside from the unanimous ones, as far as named characters go, 4 named character deaths in this episode and a couple of minor character deaths as well. How many did you catch? I just want to see how many you caught before I read them off.
You know, man, it's like I know the stable boy died. You know,
that's one.
Yeah. Oh man, who else? Sirio is presumed dead, although
yes.
I'm holding out hope for him. You know, the whole entire Stark family, which is probably, well, not the whole family, but like the ones in King's Landing. So
yes.
it's probably about 40 people right there. You know, because it's all the guards too that we see off screen, or we never actually see. Who else? Man, there's
it's a lot.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have 3. You got most of them. I have 3 more. So I counted the white corpses, the ones that came alive and attacked them,
yeah.
Yep, and you forgot Khal Drogo's blood rider whose tongue he ripped out of his throat, Mako.
Oh yeah.
So we have those ones. So a rest in peace to all of those characters, but still no major main character deaths yet after 2. But we have 2 more coming this season. Before, surprisingly enough, even though season 2 has a lot of character deaths, like a lot, none of the characters on the main cast die in season 2. It's the only season without any main cast member deaths. It's kind of insane. I was always intrigued and impressed by that in A Clash of Kings as well. But Pat, before we go off the air, do you have anything to tell the people as far as where they can follow you on the Instawebs and Instagram?
Yeah, basically, hey, listen, right now I'm just directing everybody to my Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, Huber. You know, just go there, look at some pictures I already got there. I swear I'll post at some point. It's basically a threat. You will see something that I post, but for now, go there, and otherwise, you know, you can catch me here on the Talkin TV YouTube channel.
Yes, indeed. And you can find me as well at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on here, the Talkin TV channel, posting pretty much 3 times a week, people. We've got a lot of content coming for you guys this week. We've got our Pixar review of Luca coming this Monday. We also have the final entry on the journey to the finish line, the fate of the Furious, coming this Wednesday before we review Fast and Furious 9 the following week. Keep tuning in Fridays for the Variety channel, and keep coming back to the channel, obviously, for more content. You can click the subscribe button below, click the bell next to it. That way you guys can get notified every time we put up new content. Like I said, we put up a lot of content, and you can keep up to date with everything by, once again, following our social media profiles. And as always, people, remember, 12 seasons in a short film. And for myself and Pat, watch more fucking movies.
Yeah, watch more John Cena films. Because you're going to watch it if you watch Fast
Exactly. On the road to the Iron Throne. We'll see you guys later.